19 score and 5 days ago, our four bloggers set forth upon this web a new podcast, conceived in geekery and dedicated to the proposition that all Star Trek is worth philosophizing about. Now we are engaged in yet another episode to see if that podcast, or any podcast so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great episode of that podcast, which is Trekosophy, the Star Trek philosophy podcast. We are met on July 3rd in the year of our Lord 2013 with many great leaders of our glorious revolution met for an august and solemn assembly. One might even say a congress. In fact, it is a transcontinental congress, for we are met from all across the fruited plain. Tonight we have with us Chris George Washington McGee, who drew his face on the $1 bill in crayon.
One of the most famous portraits ever.
And King Brandon Kirby George III, who talks to trees. Everyone, boo!
You know, I'll never understand you Yankee Doodles. You start a war over 2% tax, and now you're taxed at around 30% of your economy, and you're just fine with
it. Yes, definitely. And Bill Samuel Adams Allen, who stopped drinking tea and started drinking himself.
Nil desperandum is my motto, which means never give up, never surrender.
And I'm Ben Franklin McLean, who lost my bifocals when I got struck by lightning back in 1770-something. And tonight we are met to talk about not the political freedom for which our revolution was fought, but the metaphysical concept of free will. And as like I was saying earlier, free will, rock you.
Rock you.
Rock you.
Rock you.
There's a delay here.
Well,
yeah, we've been talking a lot about Star Trek in particular the last few episodes. We decided to swing the pendulum the other direction this time and really get into some more philosophy instead.
well, I thought we brought it back a little bit with Hugh, but
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and we definitely aren't banishing Star Trek by any stretch of the imagination, but
Heaven forbid.
I think it's worth talking about the idea of free will. And I think I might go on a bit of a rant here in the beginning to try and set up what we're going to talk about. And first, I need to not give my own opinion, but instead give a sort of short description of what you might find in a philosophy textbook that sort of outlines what the different positions are.
I got my finger on the red alert button.
Right. Well, so like free will and determinism and so on are concepts in the field of metaphysics, which is the discipline that looks at the nature of reality and, you know, what things really are, how things work. It has a lot to do with this idea of causation. Where there's smoke, there's fire. You guys have heard that, right?
oh yeah.
You guys, You've heard that expression, where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, the reason people say that is because people expect that the smoke was caused by the fire, and that the fire is the explanation for the smoke, in the sense that if the fire wasn't there, then the smoke wouldn't be there. The fire is a cause of the smoke, and the smoke is an effect of the fire. So when people talk about causes and effects, that's what they mean. They mean, you know, one event produced another event through this unfolding process of causation. That is a way of looking at events in time. And if we go into the nature of time, that's a whole nother podcast. Let's just assume an intuitive grasp of the concept of time for now. So looking at events in time, we see them connected by cause and effect. Now, some people think, okay, that seems to explain events like the fire causing the smoke, Why can't that concept of cause and effect be used to explain everything that ever happens ever? So that everything that ever happens has a cause that produces it, and that cause made it happen the way it happened, and it couldn't have happened any other way but the way it did, because the cause had to be behind it for it to happen. And so the idea of determinism is that because of all these prior causes that are behind us, we have no real choice about what we're going to do. It's set in stone before we're ever born. We have a destiny that is set by the prior causes that are behind us: environment, upbringing, genetics, what have you. All of that stuff is already set in stone, determined before you ever come along, and all the things you do are just a product of the unfolding of the prior causes that are behind you. That's determinism. Does that make sense?
It does. I've got a great quote for that. Let me see if I can bring it up here.
Cool.
Oh, here it is. It was the doctor, when he was having some sort of a meltdown. He was having a holograms equivalent to daddy issues. And then he goes into this diatribe. He says, the more I think about it, the more I realize there's nothing I could have done differently. Because he had to make an ethical choice to save somebody. And he couldn't decide who to save. So he just picked one at randomly, but that meant he killed someone else, and that caused some sort of a cascade failure in his program. You guys would know the technobabble better than I, but that caused a conflict in the system. So the more I think about it, the more I realize there's nothing I could have done differently. The primordial atom bursts, sending out its radiation, setting everything in motion. One particle collides with another, gases expand, planets contract, and before you know it, we've got starships and holodecks and chicken soup. In fact, you can't help but have starships, holodecks, and chicken soup, because it was all determined 20 billion years ago. And so he's coming up with this notion of determinism to help undermine the ethical dilemma he's having. He's trying to suspend the ethics by saying, well, it was all determined, no big deal.
Interesting.
We don't make moral decisions because we just don't make decisions. Everything was caused by something else.
Right. Now, I'm going to try and connect it to ethics later, but I'm just trying to stick to the metaphysics for the moment because I don't want to interject my own opinion before the right time. I want to make sure I'm giving a neutral description first. But yeah, that is definitely on topic.
Oh, I thought that's where you're headed.
And it's a good thing you read that. It expresses the idea of determinism quite well, and it's from Star Trek. See if you can look up one for libertarian free will, if you can, while I'm describing what that is.
Kirby gets 50 extra bonus points.
Yes, he gets extra bonus points. In fact, we ought to make a scoreboard. Anyway. Okay, so that was determinism. Now we have another view. It's called libertarianism. Now, when you say libertarianism, everybody immediately jumps to Ron Paul, or something political, right? Libertarianism means voting no on everything that the government wants to do that gets involved in anybody's life. That's not what libertarianism means in metaphysics, though. Okay. Libertarianism in metaphysics and libertarianism in politics have nothing whatsoever to do with each other. They are two completely different subjects, just like Einstein's relativity in physics has nothing to do with moral relativism. Those two subjects they're not in the same category. They are completely different subjects. It's the same thing here. They're not even related, just similar name. Libertarianism, in other words, free will advocacy, is the idea that our decisions are really made by us, and that human beings or persons have this mysterious power of being able to say no to any and all prior causes. Even if all of the math and statistics and so on that analyze you and what you're going to do, and all the brain hands and so on, predict that you're going to do a certain thing. You have an ability to defy all of that and say, no, I'm going to make the opposite choice. I'm going to say, no, I'm going to take the road less traveled. Does that make sense? There's no way to calculate ahead of time what you're going to do because it is not determined. That's libertarianism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. And then the third view that you will find in a philosophy textbook is compatibilism. And compatibilism is basically the idea that determinism and libertarianism are somehow compatible. That you can both have all of your decisions determined ahead of time by prior causes with no possibility at any point of your having done otherwise, and at the same time have all of your choices really be your choices. That's compatibilism. Now, I'm not going to ask whether compatibilism makes sense because as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't. I've just stated it. I'm not saying it makes sense.
I have one.
Yeah, I'm having a little
libertarianism.
hard time.
Go ahead.
Quotation.
Uh-oh. Does he get more bonus points?
This is the
Yeah.
10. No, I don't. I should get bonus points just for showing up. This is Geordie LaForge trying to speak to Hugh about Hugh, because for Hugh, everything he does is programmed. He doesn't have to think. LaForge says, think of it this way. Every time you talk about yourself, you use the word we. We want this. We want that. You don't even know how to think of yourself as a single individual. You don't say, I want this or I am Hugh. We are all separate individuals. I am Geordie. I choose what I want to do with my life. I make decisions for myself. For somebody like me, losing that sense of individuality is almost worse than dying. And the notion, or the import for our discussion, is that with these libertarians, we lose so much by getting rid of free will. We're just not willing to relinquish some of the things that the determinists will ask us to relinquish. We become something akin to Borg at that point. And it's maybe even something worse than Borg, because we'd actually be delusional by thinking we might have free will.
Okay, well, I was going to first try and do a takedown of compatibilism real quick. And there's a passage on it in Kant, which I'm not going to read, but I'm going to say compatibilism, Kant calls it word jugglery and sophistry. It's basically saying that to have a compatibilist, idea between these two, determinism and libertarianism, is putting together a string of words that don't actually mean anything. If we're determined, then we're not free. And if we're free, then we're not determined. It's one or the other. You've got to make your pick.
I'll disagree with that, but okay.
Both. Right. Well, that's what Kant says, and that's what I say.
Okay. Can Ben, you sang the Free Will Rock You song. That was done by Queen, and I'm the king. So I just want to throw something out there to just bring it home to the 24th century. And what that is Star Trek gives us a template to discuss free will questions. Does Data have free will? Does the Doctor have free will? If not, how is it differentiated between the way we make decisions? Do we have it? I mean, all these huge implications, like, is it even possible to be ethical? These Star Trek discussions, I think, play very well into the hand of philosophy. I think we're doing Trekosophy. I think we're doing philosophy through to me, this is intensely philosophical, what we're discussing right now. And it can be intensely Star Trek at the same time. It's I don't think you blend them together. I think you have both of them quite strongly. That's my rant for just elevating it to Star Trek level, but not losing any of the philosophy. That's just to set the stage for us to really try to knock down compatibilism, or elevate libertarian, or maybe even determinism, if somebody wants to defend determinism.
Yeah, you might, in defense of determinism, even though it's the opposite of my own view, it is the view that is popular in academic circles, especially relating to physics, at the present time. Well, through most of modern times, I guess. I think most modern physicists are determinists. That does not, however, justify determinism.
No.
Because that would be an assumption underlying a lot of the physics they're doing, although not, it might not be a necessary assumption to the physics they're doing, though. You see what I'm saying? Well, so let's go into ethics.
Well, before you do that, real quickly, let me bring this up. Are you saying that libertarianism is that free will is what comes down? Okay, so to bring another Star Trek reference into it, then in the Next Generation episode, A Matter of Time, the one with Rasmussen, there's a nice little exchange that Picard has with him, where he says, "Your past is my future, and as far as I'm concerned, it hasn't been written yet." Later he says, "To try or not try, to take a risk or play it safe. Your arguments have reminded me how precious the right to choose is." So he's basically, almost at the moment, has decided that he's a libertarian, or whatever.
Quite possibly.
Or just reminded that he's a libertarian.
Well, quite possibly, although we have to remember to distinguish between a right to choose various things in a political context, which is a negative right, freedom from the government stopping you, versus the metaphysical freedom to will, or, freedom to choose that
I'm talking
you want
about
something.
metaphysical in this case.
Yeah, it was. In that episode, it was the metaphysical choice.
Okay. Well, I just want to say in all charity to determinists that being a determinist does not imply that you're some kind of tyrant, right? We have to keep that in mind. There are many determinists who are political libertarians and metaphysical determinists. So it's not, being a determinist does not mean you're opposed to political ideas of liberty. We just have to make sure that's absolutely clear. I was going to bring up ethics. Now, one of the major arguments...
Well, before we go there, though, I'd like to kind of maybe give a shot at defending compatibilism, because I know everybody wants to dismiss it and say you can't have it. It's got to be one or the other. But I think a case could be made both within Star Trek and within our own universe for compatibilism.
Well, this is interesting.
Yeah.
I'll start with the Star Trek one because it just throws out a couple of good examples. For the free will side of thing, where choices affect, where you have a choice and it's not all predetermined, I would simply point to the existence of a mirror universe. The fact that Star Trek goes for the many worlds theory, where every choice, every action plays out in all sorts of combinations. So they did it with Worf when he was unstuck quantumly. They've done it every time they do a mirror universe episode. So it points strongly to a universe that runs on a libertarian or free will principle, where there are changes and nothing is set, fixed, or determined. At the same time, they also point to determinism when it comes to dealing with time travel, because it's all about making sure history plays out a certain way and making sure events unfold a certain way. And the time travel episodes especially point to compatibilism, because usually it's about making a choice in such a way that you choose the path that leads to the future you want to still be created, because time has been messed up the first time around and you've got to go fix it. You have to make the choice. It's not just show up and, oh, you're fulfilling whatever happened. They had to, the original guy who was there when Benjamin Sisko went back in time, there already was a Gabriel Bell. Yes. And if Benjamin Sisko and Julian Bashir had not gotten involved, Gabriel Bell would have been history's Gabriel Bell. But they showed up and they messed with things, which altered the flow of things, and Cisco had to become Gabriel Bell, which it almost looked like a predestination paradox, but it was more of a fill in the gaps. And I think that's how the compatibilism works in our own universe. When you look at subatomic particles, you got 4 basic atomic forces, right? You got the electromagnetic, the strong nuclear, the weak nuclear, and gravitational. And on the atomic scale, gravity is the weakest of the 4 forces. But when you get up to the macro atomic scale where we are, gravity is the most significantly noticed of the 4 forces. So I think that compatibilism is viable because free will and determinism don't really conflict with each other, in the sense that there is a general flow to the inevitable outcome of all things, but it's not specific as to the details and the points. Somebody's going to run into the burning building and rescue that kitten, but there's not a specific person whose destiny it is. It's just whoever happens to be there at the time.
Well, what the libertarian asserts is a doctrine about individual human choices. Right. Individual human choices are not traceable by any principle back past behind the individual. That anytime you are making, you are consciously making an important choice, it really could go either way. Both of the possibilities, both the possibilities before you could be actualized, and that you actually have a power to make one of them become actualized and to render the other one impossible from then on.
Right.
That's what the libertarian asserts. Now, compatibilism, I would argue, is ignoring the essential definition that I just stated. Okay. It is, in fact, I would argue that compatibilism is generally one position or the other, stated with sloppy wording.
I don't know.
In the long run.
See, the thing is, the individual.
The libertarian doesn't deny that there may be, events that must come to pass. Okay, it's not that there is no cause and effect at all. It's that it is possible to have deviations from what would otherwise happen because human beings make a choice. That's what libertarianism says. If you accept that, then you're a libertarian, period. And if you don't, then you're not. Since libertarians don't deny that there is causation, there's no room between the two positions for there to be a compatibilism, is what I'm saying. Either we have a completely hard deterministic universe, or we have a universe in which we can make free choices. If we can make free choices at all, then the libertarians are correct. Anyway, that's what I would say. But people do argue about it.
Ben, what does it take to make a free choice?
Well, that's a good question. Now, I would say to make a free choice, you've got to have at least 2 possibilities in front of you, and you've got to have the power to make one of them an actuality and to stop the other one.
Well, I mean, Data and the Doctor are in a very unfortunate position here, because when you look at the physical world and you operate with the Newtonian assumption that everything has some prior cause, well, if all we are is matter, we didn't have any sort of say in it. We didn't have a say in what environment we'd be born into. We didn't have a say about our genetic makeup. If that's all there is to the human being, then free will's in a very serious problem. Free will's in jeopardy.
I think what Brandon is saying, if I'm not mistaken, is that materialism implies determinism.
That's exactly what I'm saying. But the Doctor and Data are both made completely of material.
Are you?
I mean, there's an argument to be had about whether or not we have a soul, but they were. I don't know. I don't think there is an argument with them.
Why not?
These photons, computer program.
Well, there's a couple ways I could approach that. One is I could say, well, here's one that I wouldn't have told you 4 months ago. Bill, you read Children of the Mind, right?
Yes.
Right. In Children of the Mind, it pretty much says that a soul is a phylote, right? I mean,
Right.
It's pretty much the idea. Jane has a soul just like anybody else because she's got a phylote, even though it's not attached to a body in an ordinary way. She's got a soul just like anybody else.
Sorry, you have to explain.
I'm gonna clear this up. I just want to
is.
see if, we're gonna get there. But I just wanted to see if Bill remembers the book. Do you remember that book?
Yeah, vaguely. It's been a while, and part of the Orson Scott Card trilogy, but it just kind of.
It got weird.
Yeah, it was. He was searching the entire universe to find something within himself, and I think he kind of lost some of the message.
Yeah. Well, anyway, there's no particular reason why we can't simply say that the moment Data became a person, which would have been the moment of his discovery, I expect, he got a soul. And the moment the Doctor was turned on, or the moment the Doctor crossed the threshold from being the factory default object to being this thing that actually thought itself with an eye, got a soul and became a person. Since a soul is a non-material thing, I can't see as why we would have to say that we can't have souls that are connected to matter in bizarre and unusual ways, such as these characters from Star Trek. If we're going to talk about souls, and if we're going to bring souls in,
I understand. I'm committing the general policy here, but that being said, you could explain them entirely without reference to a soul.
well, I don't know. I don't think you could explain. There's a certain way in which we recognize that these things are persons, and we delineate them from the ship's computer, which isn't a person, or when it does become a person, then we have problems. But when these things are persons, we recognize we're talking about a person. Then there's something that does need to be explained more than a mere appliance needs to be explained. You know what I'm saying?
Well, let me draw out my comment a little bit, just in case I realized it was so poorly explained. There's a lot of thought and philosophy that there are elements of human beings that can't be properly dissected under a microscope. And
Or an electron microscope or whatever. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And so a lot of these things are going to be thought of as a spiritual. Kant calls it the phenomena, or the noumena rather than the phenomena, for the philosophers out there. Yeah. Well, with Data, the totality of his existence, the same thing with the Doctor. I'm just restating my case, but I'm not addressing what you said just yet.
Sure.
There isn't anything. I mean, with human beings, there's a lot of things such as morality,
which I keep wanting to get to.
arguably logic, certain metaphysical concepts. There's certain aspects to human beings that science, it not only does it not have an explanation for it yet, but it's almost contradictory that it would have an explanation for it. And so those would be considered the unscientific aspects of human beings. Well, science constructed data, and science constructed the doctor, and so there'd be no unscientific aspect or component to it.
Well, I think there is, because I think once when they start talking about the doctor having grown beyond his programming, they say that many times. I rather think that that means he has developed non-scientific aspects.
Well, I think that's true, yeah.
And they do say quite often that Data's positronic brain defies analysis. They have to take him apart to see if they can make more Datas because they don't know how otherwise. I suspect that.
But didn't defy Noonian? You didn't. Noonian Soong's analysis.
I suspect that Noonian Soong. Now this is eisegesis. Okay, the Star Trek writers might have done whatever they thought. But I suspect that Noonian Soong put a great deal of himself into his projects. And that they have all this stuff about him being a father more than just a designer, And I kind of suspect that what they're trying to get at is in a similar way that a biological son, inherits something from the outlook of the parents, even if they never meet their parents. They still inherit something from the basic outlook of their parents. We find this to be the case, in practice. I think what they're saying is that there's a sort of heredity of souls that goes on. That's a little bit far-fetched and esoteric kind of idea, which gets us far away from the basic concepts of free will and determinism. But I rather think that if they just tried to churn out factories of datas, what they'd get would be sophisticated calculating machines, and they wouldn't get the sort of character that has a pet cat and has a statue of Tasha Yar and actually cares about those things, because they wouldn't have anything to inherit this soul from.
Right.
Does that sort of make sense? The Ender's Game books, which, by the way, I don't think the philotic stuff in the Ender's Game books makes any sense at all in any sort of physical way. But I think what Card is trying to get at with it is that there's some sort of moment at which a new person must, the matter that composes a new person must in some sense call for a soul, and the soul has to sort of come there from somewhere. Now, Card, as a Marmon, probably has some really interesting ideas about where that would be from, that I don't, because RLDS don't really know anything about pre-existence. But there does, if you believe in the soul at all, there has to be a moment at which the soul comes, or a process by which the soul comes. And even if it might just have come in a different way for these goofy artificial intelligence characters than for biological organisms. But you could write that. If you're the author of a story, you can write whatever you want to write. You know what I'm saying? But this has gotten us way off topic. But it's not an impossibility. It's far-fetched to talk about any of this stuff. But it's not an impossibility conceptually, I don't think. Is that at least valid, if not sound?
Well, it's valid. And I started by saying I've committed the genetic fallacy. That's how I began. And then I laid out my argument. What's that?
How was that? How did you commit the genetic fallacy? I didn't catch you at it.
Because I said you falsified the view that there is no soul simply because you can explain away. Yeah.
Right.
Simply because you can explain away something like origin and so forth. But anyways, I started out by saying, yeah, okay, I'm predicating all this on a fallacy. However, where you're going to have to go is into something totally absurd in order to come up with a counterexample.
Which is where I went.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Far-fetched.
Okay.
Far-fetched.
Yeah. Yeah, something esoteric at the very least.
Yeah.
But this is all getting into really heavy stuff that I wasn't wanting to go toward. But I always wanted to just talk about the relationship between the question of free will and ethics, which is really interesting stuff, which is a lot more down to earth than what we've been talking about here, and should probably help get Chris and Bill back caught up with us. You guys still there? Okay, let's get back on track here for a second.
Actually, Ben, let's hold off before we get back on track and do the ethics. I'm afraid we're going to have to split this episode into two parts. This first half, we're going to have to end here, I'm afraid, where we've basically laid out all the descriptions for free will, determinism, and compatibilism. So thanks for listening to us. Remember, you can find us on the web at Trekosophy.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Please send us any questions you'd like to have answered to our inbox at trekosophy@gmail.com. And please leave us a review on iTunes. We definitely take them seriously, and we'll do what we can to try and make this podcast better for everybody. Join us next week as we will continue this discussion on free will, determinism, and compatibilism. Specifically, we'll finally get into what Ben was trying to get into at least 2 or 3 times today, which was the ethics of free will and determinism, etc. Until then, take care.
It's like it was exactly 55 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Let me know when we get up to 88.
If George Norman Lippert can make it, then we're going to do Evil Admiral RoboCop.
See, what scares me now is you've got the good mic and you're going to realize my golden tones are actually just gold-plated.
July 1st was Canada Day. We celebrate the BNA Act when we became a country.
Really? That's
That
neat.
sounds an awful like another holiday I've heard about.
Well, nobody fought any wars when we became a country. It's pretty peaceful.
Okay.
We just asked the British, hey, can we leave? Yeah,